In this video, I'm going to be going through chapter 3 of the novella of Mice and Men. I'll be giving a summary and some key points for analysis. This is particularly useful if you're revising this text for IGCSE or GCSE literature. So let's look at the events that happen. We see Slim gives Lenny one of his newborn puppies. Now we know, obviously, how much Lenny enjoys anything soft that he can stroke, so he is thrilled by this. And George and Slim have this conversation about George and Lenny's past, including the incident in Weed. So we find out a bit more information, and that we understand that actually, is as harmless as Lenny is in his intention. Lenny only wants to, stroke soft things. We find out that actually he unintentionally brings hurt and violence and problems. And Slim is a very understanding kind of character that gives George space to speak. So we've got that wisdom there. Tensions rise when Carlson insists that Candy's old dog should be put down, and the other men don't really back Candy up. So Candy very reluctantly agrees, and Carlson takes the dog outside and shoots it. Wit, who's another ranch hand, he is very excited and he shows the other men a letter in a magazine written by a previous ranch worker, Bill Tenner. So you might be thinking, well, what's that got to do with anything? Who's this Bill Tenner? We don't even hear much from Wit either. But it's interesting because these men are comparatively powerless. Their lives are kind of at the whim of their bosses, who give them work for a certain period of time. That's where they get their bed and board. They aren't able to kind of put down those roots and achieve their dreams. And obviously that fits into the theme of the American dream. So the fact that Wit is excited by this letter by Bill Tenner, it's interesting that Bill Tenner said he wanted to be published in a magazine, and now he's written in a letter and it's been published. But Wit is kind of really overawed and like excited by this. I think it shows how little the men can do to pursue their dreams. So the fact that Bill Tenner has done this, it gives them a slight bit of hope, but it's also maybe a bit sad for us as the reader, because we think, well, actually, getting a letter published in a magazine isn't really that big of a deal, possibly. And so, it shows that fragility of the American dream. We also had this interesting conversation between George and Wit, where they discuss going to Old Susie's the following night. Now we can infer that Old Susie's is a brothel, and this is interesting because the men spend their money seeking maybe that companionship when they go out on a Friday night, but also it kind of reminds us maybe of the innate sexism in society, that Curly's wife is criticised for giving the men the eye and just trying to talk to the men, and all these words like rat trap, jailbait are used about Curly's wife when all she's doing is actually really talking to the other men. And then in comparison, it's so normal within this society that the men would just go down to a brothel on the weekend. So there's that double standard of, I guess, sexual morality here between the men and the women. We then have this very important conversation to the core of the novella, where Candy overhears George and Lenny talking about their dream farm, and he asks to join them, and he offers his savings to help make it a reality. So up to this point, George and Lenny, yes, of course, they had a dream and they talked about it over and over again, but it was very much a dream. It wasn't necessarily something they ever thought would actually happen. It was something that, kept them going, gave them hope, but maybe not realistic. Now Candy could make that real for them, and it would be amazing for Candy too, because he would also get to spend the last bit of his life on his own land, working and being looked after by George and Lenny. So we've got this real moment of hope. Interestingly, though, and I think the structure here is worth considering, immediately after this conversation, we have this violence. Okay, so we have this moment of hope, excitement, we're going to get our own land, and then immediately afterwards, Curly comes in and we have this fight scene, this really violent scene between him and Lenny. And so it's interesting, I think, that Steinbeck, creates this more positive feeling, and then immediately the tension is raised, and it's possibly maybe foreshadowing that this dream actually isn't ever going to come to fruition. So Curly picks a fight with Lenny. Curly comes in and he's, being a bit embarrassed by the men, and he thinks, well, who can I pick on? And Lenny is in his mind, the weakest of them. And initially, Lenny doesn't fight back. Lenny is very much almost acts like a child. But when George tells him to fight back, Lenny crushes Curly's hand, and Curly, to quote, flops about like a little fish. So Curly is really reduced here, And Slim warns Curly not to say anything about the incident. Okay, so they protect, because obviously George and Lenny would get fired if the boss knew what had happened. But Slim basically warns Curly not to say anything, and they kind of threaten to tell everyone what really happened if Curly does say anything. So thinking about the setting, the majority of the scene takes place in the bunkhouse. And given that so much happens in this scene, this does create kind of a confined and tense environment. Okay, if we think about everything that happened in that summary, it's a very busy, active chapter, but it all takes place in the bunkhouse. So it creates that feeling of being confinement and tension, and it has this oppressive atmosphere. And there are these moments of connection, between George and Slim, and then between George, Lenny, and Candy. But this is overshadowed by the violence and power struggles. So we have this nice moment, Slim with George, Candy's dog gets shot. Then we have a moment about the dream with Candy, George, and Lenny immediately after this fight. So that John Steinbeck really takes us on this journey of ups and downs in this chapter. In terms of character development, so Slim, continues to be this wise figure of authority and wisdom. And his kindness towards Lenny and George and his ability to make others talk shows his influence on the ranch. Okay, he doesn't have to force things. He just uses his wisdom, and people respect him and his leadership. Candy has a lot of development in this chapter, so he's obviously deeply affected by the death of his dog, and his eagerness to join George and Lenny's dream highlights his desperation for companionship and security. He later regrets to George not shooting his own dog, which foreshadows events in the final chapter. Carlson. So Carlson's role really in this chapter is to push Candy into having his dog shot. And so Carlson here really represents the kind of harsh, unsentimental attitude of ranch life. So from Carlson's perspective, the dog doesn't do anything. It's not helpful on the farm. And he says it stinks up the bunkhouse. So from Carlson's perspective, he can't see that actually the dog might have value to Candy as a companion. He only sees it in terms of what value it brings to the farm. And so it's almost representing this kind of very bleak kind of capitalist outlook, where if something isn't valuable, it's not worth anything, which obviously perhaps represents Candy as an old person. Once he's not valuable to the farm, what will happen to Candy? We don't know, but there's not that support system within society. So Curly, his insecurities become more apparent in this chapter, and he attempts to assert his dominance over Lenny, but his crushed hand symbolizes his loss of control. So his power is based on intimidation, which collapses when faced with real strength. So perhaps consider what John Steinbeck is saying about leadership and what real strength is. So in terms of loneliness, this theme is explored. Candy's sorrow over his dog's death highlights the loneliness of old age, and the other men dismiss his grief, reinforcing the idea that those who are weak or old are disposable. And in terms of the American dream, so for the first time for George and Lenny, the dream of owning land seems within reach. Candy's financial contribution gives them real hope. However, as mentioned previously, immediately after this exciting conversation comes the fight with Curly. So a really, really busy chapter here. Lots to consider. Thanks so much for watching. Please do subscribe and let me know any questions you've got in the comments so I can answer them in future videos. And all the best with your exams.